There you go. Will okay. Everybody will see the name. Okay. Okay. No, if you make sure. Okay. It's already there. It's already there. This will happen. 6, 7, 51 that I gave. Go fast. Does it work?
Would you like us to be connected with the video or without the video? Hola María José, ¿cómo estás?
Doesn't change. It's stuck. Okay, now it's changing. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. I changed it. Delete these and delete it.
Okay, I will start.
Giacomo, would you like us to be with the camera on or off?
I wonder if they can hear us in the room.
Even if they can, I think they have other issues to deal with.
Right now they're entertained, yes.
Good afternoon.
Hello?
Can you hear well? Oh,
yeah.
Can you hear us, Giacomo?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Do you want us to be with the camera on or off?
But when you would talk maybe on for the time being off both the camera and the microphone, please.
Perfect.
So we are in a quite hot environment. We're experiencing, I think, scenario 8.5 here in this room. Welcome to everybody. This is the second presentation of the task force on inventory of the day. The first one was held by this afternoon by Maria on the short-lived climate forces methodological report. Now we will focus on the CDR CCU's methodological report. So we will start with a short introduction by Maria on general concept of what the TFI is, task force on inventory. Then I will present the outline, the timeline of the CDR CCU's methodological report. And then we'll leave some room for science with scientific presentations still on CDR and on other activities by the TFI, specifically on land use emissions. So the main focus will be CDR and land use in the second part. I would start giving to Maria for a short introduction to what is the task force and inventory, the scope and the main activities. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. I mean, the ones that have been in the previous events and the event yesterday, you will probably already know, but it's always good to repeat things. So first slide, Jimmy. Well, anyway, I will start. I mean, as you know, the task force on inventories is a slightly different animal than the working groups that are doing the regular assessments in each of the cycles. Indeed, the task force was created because the convention is requested to parties to develop ESG inventories that are based on robust methodologies, and the methodologies rely or produce comparable results. So that was the reason why the task force was created, in order to develop this type of methodologies. Now we are getting on the slide. We don't do regular, let's say, cycles. We work on the basis of the demand or the need to update methodologies or to update emission factors to keep improving inventories. So in a way, we are conditioned by how the experience on inventories is progressing in countries, because this is what actually creates the demand. Let's see if we can get a presentation. Well, the task force have two co-chairs, and we have more support than the working groups, because we have 12 members in the task force bureau. Okay, next. Okay, so I mean, in a nutshell, what our objective is to develop and refine international agreed methodologies and software for the calculation of reporting of national GHG emissions and removals. And also, we encourage to use in a widespread manner those methodologies, not only by the countries, but also by other actors that may be interested in producing comparable GHG emissions and removals. This work is managed by these two co-chairs and supported by the Task Force Bureau with 12 members, which Giacomo and myself, we are members. Next. So just to emphasize that we don't measure, we don't manage, we just produce methodologies for others to measure and others to manage this information for different purposes, reporting to the convention, managing your implementation, etc. Basically, we produce methodological reports, right? So these methodological reports are applicable globally with standardized methodologies and emission factors to ensure consistency and comparability. That basically means that we need to actually produce methodologies that can be used by countries that have different capacities. And this is why we have mechanisms like tier approaches, for example, simple approaches, more complex, and more complex. The process of producing the reports, it entails all these elements. We can held expert meetings to prepare how the methodological reports and the material and the scoping of the reports will be done. And the scoping meeting produce a proposal for the scope of the outline of the methodological report, which is presented to the plenary of the IPCC for adoption. In that regard, is similar to what the working groups are doing. Once it's approved, we develop the guidance with regular lead outdoor meetings. We also have lead outdoor meetings. Until the convention, but it's a document which is there and anyone can use to produce estimate. Next. So basically, what these methodologies are doing is they allow inventory compilers to produce GHG estimates consistent with these 5 principles: transparency, accuracy, comparability, consistency, and completeness. Those are the 5 principles that guide inventories. The 2006 IPCC guidelines are the ones that are mandatory for the reporting under the Paris Agreement for all countries at the moment. Those methodologies are, let's say, a refinement. Those methodologies emanated from previous reports, the 96 revised, the 2003 GPG, the 2000 uncertainty guidance, and so on, and some of the supplements. Now, recently, we also developed the 2019 refinement. This is not yet adopted by the convention, but there is updates on emission factors, and some methodologies can be helpful for countries to actually go to higher tiers using the 2006 guidance. Generally, the definition of anthropogenic emissions is easy for many sectors. For example, for energy, for industrial processes, for waste. It's more difficult for the land use sector. And there, we had to use proxies for anthropogenic emissions. The reason for that is actually because what we are mandated to produce is something that inventory compilers, which are not scientists necessarily, are using for regular reporting, yearly regular reporting and in the inventories. So it has to be practical. Next. So in the 7 assessment cycle, we already had 2 methodological reports. One was presented this afternoon early, and now Giacomo will actually introduce the second one. So the CDR report.
So we can go to the next slide set, number 2. So essentially, the next slide. So the methodological report has a long title, methodological report on CDR, which stands for carbon dioxide removal, and CCUs, which stands for carbon capture and utilization and storage. As you know, in order to reach the net zero, which is from a physical point of view, a prerequisite to stabilize global warming, we need to deploy some CDR to counterbalance the hard to abate residual emissions. It was somehow the main motivation for this report. A bit of background. At the plenary 60 in Istanbul, the planner decided that the task force and inventory would hold an expert meeting and prepare a methodological report by the end of 2027. This would allow this report to be included in the reporting guidance, FC reporting guidance, to allow country to start reporting on this removal from 2030 onward. Based on this decision, the TFI held an expert meeting in Vienna and then a scoping meeting in Copenhagen. The expert meeting assessed the potential gaps in existing method, and the scoping meeting prepared an outline that was then brought forward to the panel. In at IPCC plenary 62, we failed to find agreement. We can discuss later why, but we finally got an agreement 2 weeks ago in Lima, so it's a fresh decision, and we approved the outline. Next. These are an overview of the CDR methods identified in the working group 3 of 6th assessment report. Okay, all these presentations the video will be available online. Next. This table shows the CDR method in Air 6 on the left. On the right, the additional methods identified and assessed in the scoping meeting, and in red, the guidance, which is partly available in the IPCC guidance. So we assess what is already available, what has to be integrated, and all this has been discussed in the expert meeting and the scoping meeting. Next. The assessment criteria were the following. First of all, is there a gap in the IPCC guidance among all these methods? Can be delineated as a sink or a source? Is it significant, sufficient for including? The impact should be, of course, enough to worth the effort. Can a tier 1 default value can be established, so the simple one that everybody can use? And can higher tier methods be developed? And finally, can estimates be verified? So verification should be possible using dependent data alternative methods, because it's something that greatly enhances the confidence that we may have on the reported estimates. Next. This is a detailed assessment summary by the method. I will not go in detail, but just to give you an idea of the CDR, we assessed 18 different CDR methods that range for essentially cover the all greenhouse gases sectors, from energy, industry, AFOLU. And the assessment ended up with concluding, no, we don't need to include the methodological report, because in some cases there is already enough guidance in the existing guidance, enough method. In other case, we say, yes, there is no guidance, so we have to add this guidance. In other case, there is guidance, but it's outdated or is not enough. We can integrate and supplement and refine that. So it's a mix of no, because it's already included, or insufficient data, and or additional or new work. Next. The title is the long title that I will need just the front page with the title, and the format will use the same format of the IPCC 2006 guidance. This makes it easier for inventory compilers to use the methodological report together with existing guidance. So essentially the 5-volume, the known volume for the national inventory compilers. So the general guidance reporting, energy, industrial processing, product use, agricultural, forest, and other land uses, wastes. And then we added a 6th volume, which is new, and includes carbon dioxide capture, removal, transport, utilization, and storage. This again is a bit more detailed. I will not go through individual methods, but it's just for your reference. And it's the outline. So the outline means is what the authors will be tasked to follow and to develop methods to integrate existing method for all these specific topics. In some cases is new, in some cases just refining the current guidance. Next. Important one, the work plan. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule. We have a tough work for the next 2 years. So the IPCC plenary just approved the outline. Then now is important. It's all the call for nomination is open. So if anyone is interested, just get in touch with your IPCC focal point. And there is the usual forms to be submitted for to be nominated. The selection criteria are the one that are followed by the IPCC, which include gender, geographical balance, a mix of expertise in terms of scientific and technical expertise, and a mix of previous and no experience with the IPCC. So the deadline is 12th of December. So if you're interested, take note of that. In the next year, we foresee 2 lead author meetings, and 2 other lead author meetings will be held in 2027. And the schedule, which is a quite tight schedule, after, as you know, as the IPCC report, we have the first of the draft and 3 different review processes with expert review and governmental review. At the end, the expectation is to have the final adoption by end of 2027. So these can be considered in the revision of the MPG guidance in 2028. This is the plan, essentially. Next. So just to conclude, if you want to know more, these 2 QR codes give you access to all the IPCC TFI meetings, including all the meetings that have been held on CDR. And above is the outline, the specific, the detail of the outline of the methodological report, which is essentially, will explain more in detail what I showed in the slides. I would now leave the floor if there are technical questions or clarification on this part. After that, we'll continue with presentation, still on CDR, online presentation on CDR, and then also on land use. Is there any technical question on these 2 presentations so far? We'll continue to discuss of CDR anyway, so you can keep your question for later. Okay, I don't see raised hand. I would then pass to the floor to Oliver Gedden. That is a bureau member of the Working Group 3. It will provide an overview of the work done in the context of the state of CDR report.
Hello, I'm here. Hello, everybody in Belém. My name is Oliver Gedden. I'm joining from Berlin. I hope you can hear me. And will you share my slides, or should I share my screen?
Hi, Oliver. We can hear you well and see you well. And
there are
the slides are on.
Okay, we can already go to the next one. So I'm speaking here as a member of the State of Carbon Dioxide Removal team, but as Giacomo mentioned, I'm also on the Bureau of Working Group 3, and there was an author in AR6 responsible for carbon dioxide removal. Here you simply see what Giacomo already said. If you look to the right, 2100 is a stylized pathway. So there is something still above the net zero line. There's something below the net zero line. You see it for net GHG and net CO2. You have to have removals to get to net zero. That's why it's called net zero and not just zero. And if we overshoot 1.5 or exceed 1.5, as you increasingly hear, and would want to get back to 1.5 after having exceeded it, we need net negative emissions, which means probably even more carbon dioxide removal later, which is one of the reasons why we increasingly talk about it in the IPCC. Next slide, please. This is a figure that is about the delineations between carbon dioxide removal, carbon capture and utilization, carbon capture and storage, but there are overlaps. And the logic is to explain what is carbon dioxide removal. And to be carbon dioxide removal or counted as carbon dioxide removal, it has to confirm three principles. The CO2 needs to be from the atmosphere, that's principle one. This CO2 needs to be stored durably, principle two, and it needs to be additional to natural processes, principle three, and that's mainly about forestry. So if you look at panel A, the CO2 comes from the atmosphere via direct air capture, is stored geologically, so that's carbon dioxide removal. But if you look at panel B, if that CO2 is captured from the atmosphere, but is then utilized as an aviation fuel, then that CO2 will be up in the air again 2 or 3 weeks later. If you do all this with carbon-free energy, then you have a close to net zero process, which is quite an achievement compared to what we're doing today, but it is not carbon dioxide removal and does not count as carbon dioxide removal. If you look at panel 3 and you extract fossil carbon, coal, for example, have a coal power plant, do carbon capture and storage there, and the CO2 ends again in geological storage, then that also reduces emissions considerably, depending on the capture rate of that plant, but it's not carbon dioxide removal because it's not CO2 from the atmosphere, but fossil CO2. And in panel D, that's about forestry removals and the difference between certain ways of looking at this. So if it is CO2 bound by forests, but these forests are standing forests not managed, then we would not count it because it's basically a CO2 fertilization effect, an indirect effect. But if that's the right part of panel D, you have afforestation projects, reforestation projects, so based on human activity, and then it goes into biological storage, then it's counted as carbon dioxide removal. Next slide, please. This is a list of methods. Basically, many of those you saw already in Giacomo's overview, with some categorization via capture process, the carbon storage pool, the readiness, the technological readiness, mitigation potential, storage timescale. What is interesting, if you look at the first four, the category, the gray area, is what we call conventional CDR. This is what we're already doing. It's all about land use and forestry. And these are also, if you look into the readiness column right next to it, this is what we are doing already today at quite large scales. Whereas many of the methods that we will now assess for guidelines and methodology guidelines are novel ones. So the brown gold color here, but these are more about the future. And the next slide, please. And if you look what we're doing today, and that's why the first figure was important, we of course already are doing afforestation and reforestation, and the calculation is not an easy one, and Rosa can talk about it, and Giacomo is also an expert. So we are doing approximately 2 gigatons, 2.2 gigatons per year, but almost all of it is from afforestation and reforestation, and only a tiny little part is on novel methods like biochar, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, enhanced rock weathering. So that's really quite a striking difference between these two. And on top of that, and you probably all know that, the emissions from deforestation are still much higher than the removals from afforestation. But this distinction becomes important between novel and conventional methods if you look at the next slide and see what scenarios are assuming how this will, what kind of trajectories we will see in the future. The next slide, please. So above you see these are just net emissions curves showing you around 2050 for 1.5 trajectories. They are going net negative. They are assumed to be net negative. But if you look at the bottom, the left one is about conventional CDR. The right one is about novel CDR. Conventional CDR in integrated assessment models is thought to still increase until mid-century and then level off and go down a little, and whereas novel CDR is supposed to really take off to achieve these net emissions we see above. So in the future, we'll need a lot of more of novel CDR, also because conventional CDR is maybe quite limited in a changing climate. And the next slide. And this should be the last one. We cannot go through the details, but if you look at it from the right, so deployment and proposals was our name for whatever you have in NDCs or in long-term strategy. It's all about forestry, what we do and what countries propose for the next years, and we'll go into that after me. But the further you go left, you see in investments and high-value patents, it becomes a little bit more diversified, and scenarios and grant funding even more diversified. So the expectation is that in the future, it will not only be about afforestation, but that's the reality we live in now, and we will have to diversify there. And we are seeing the economic activity already, which fueled, let's say, the demand coming from IPCC member governments to look into methodologies. Next slide. And that's it, right?
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. If you want to know more, you can look at the State of CDR website or just listen to Will, who is also something presenting from there.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Well deserved. I would now take a short presentation still from this State of CDR, which is, again, is not the IPCC, is a scientific report which summarizes the state of knowledge on CDR. Is one of the resources, scientific resources that will be taken into account, not much in methodological report, but also very much in the working 3, for example, section on CDR. So I would ask Will Lamp, connected online, that will tell another bit of the narrative of this state of CDR. Are you connected, Will?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Shall I wait for the slides to come up?
Yes. So we then take maybe 1 or 2 questions after we'll. Yes. The slides are coming. Yes. Next.
Perfect. Next slide, please.
Next.
Right. So
Yes.
thank you very much. As Oliver said, one of the tasks that we're taking on in the state of carbon dioxide removal is to look into what countries are actually pledging. That's of course interesting for many people who are attending COP. And like a large chunk of the science community, we were busy reading the nationally determined contributions as they were coming in. throughout and up to the end of September. And we published a short update report on that that you can find on our website. And so what we're doing there is really digging into the NDCs, and we're looking for explicit or implied changes to the land use sector by 2030. Some countries are quite transparent about this. Other countries, you need to do quite a bit of digging into further documents or make some educated guesswork. And from these overall changes to the land use sector, we're trying to estimate the removal component. And there's a sort of set of methods behind that, which is documented in the State of CDR report. Some parties do mention these novel CDR methods, which is what Oliver already introduced, but very few, right? So that's something very clear we see. Next slide. Yeah, this is a quick takeaway from what we found. 7 members submitted a new. Oh, so I should clarify, we're focusing really just on the G20 countries here. So the countries that make up the majority of total global emissions that are actually cover most of or a significant chunk of global land area as well. And of course, GDP. So 7 of these members submitted a new NDC by the end of September. 8 provided enough information for us to estimate the contribution of conventional CDR to the 2030 target. One of them did provide information on the targets up to 2035. 1 provided information on novel CDR, and 7 took actions that make us think that these pledges are in some way credible, right? So that this includes like setting net zero targets into law. They describe quite concrete CDR policies and measures in their biennial transparency reports. They've published implementation plans for how they might reach net zero. Next slide, please. So here you get a sort of a quick snapshot of our results. We have here in this table a list of G20 members, excluding Germany, Italy, and France, because they submitted together with the European Union a single NDC. We see whether we got a 2035 NDC by the end of September. We can see their current land use sector emissions, as well as their current land use sector removals. So on the left, for example, from deforestation, from the right, afforestation. And then we estimate the pledged change in the removals, so that right-hand column, up to 2030. And in the green, we see increases to those removals. So for example, in China, India, the European Union, Indonesia, and the United Kingdom. Whereas some other countries in orange, they actually expect a decrease in their land sink and their removals. Overall, we find that the increase is somewhere on the order of 214 to 265 megatons by 2030, which is not very much if we think about comparing to the scenarios that Oliver was showing there. The European Union here is one of the clearest targets, the land use sector target of 310, which is relatively well known. We estimate the removal component of that as an addition of 53 megatons, but that is relative to the latest decadal average. Internally, I think it's consistent with the 42 megatons that's often spoken of in that context. Yeah, I mean, the bottom line here, and this is where I would finish off, is that we are not getting a lot of information from countries, right? At least for the G20, we would hope to see this table completely filled out. Unfortunately, we can't fill it out, even for very significant players in this area, such as Russia, Australia, which is really actively talking about carbon dioxide removal in many of its submissions to the UNFCCC. The United States, of course, doesn't have or will no longer have an active NDC starting at the beginning of next year. So really the problem here is lack of transparency. What removals are countries actually planning for? We don't have very much information on it. Where we do have information, we find that it's probably looking like it's not enough, at least in the short term. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Will. So for the sake of time, thank you. I would conclude the round of presentation. Maybe let's leave the question for the end, if it is okay for you. The last two presentations will be on land use. That is one of the topic that you heard so much. So let's go with the next presentation. Land use is one of the CDR activity. The challenge of land use is to separate what is anthropogenic from what is natural. So this is the main challenge. Next. We can skip that because essentially has been addressed by Oliver. Next. So next. So we have an issue in defining anthropogenic fluxes. These numbers are from the global carbon budget, from the latest one. You have emission from fossil fuel. You have the net anthropogenic emission, about 5 gigatons of emission from land use. These are the numbers from the global carbon budget, are the numbers of the anthropogenic land use estimate you can find in the 6th assessment report. Then you have a large natural sink that the model sees as natural, and then the ocean sink. Next. There is a problem, though, that the national inventory have different system boundaries than the one used by global models and the IPCC assessment report so far. Next. And there is a gap, a huge gap of 9 gigatons of CO2, which is 25% of total fossil fuel emission in the total anthropogenic fluxes from LULUCF, defined based on the model's definition and based on the national inventory definition that follow the IPCC guidance, methodological guidance. On this QR code, you can have access to more information on this topic that have been explored by the scientific community and recently also by the IPCC. Next. One may wonder, is this mismatch of definition a problem? Well, to explain that, I use this analogy usually. Imagine to be in a car. Let's put the Paris Agreement into a car where the driver is the policymaker. It holds the steering wheel and decides speed and direction. You have the car dashboard that, like the national inventories, provide the basic information to the driver. And then you have the navigation system that provides possible route to destination. Next. The same approach is followed under the Paris Agreement, where every 5 years, as you know, the global stocktake allow the driver to, the policymaker to check the distance to destination. And essentially, we see how the INDC are consistent or not, are far from the pathway that are consistent with the Paris Agreement. Next. The problem that I described before of this large gap is like having the car dashboard in kilometer and the navigation system in miles. So the classical question about who is right, who is wrong on estimates of land use, no one is right or wrong. It's like having two different languages. Next. The only problem you should avoid is compare apple and oranges. And this comparison is problematic in the context of the global stocktake because it wouldn't allow an appropriate comparison of where the country are compared to what they are expected to be in line with the Paris Agreement goal that they decided. So next, the answer, yes, it is a problem. This is much to understand where we are and the distance to destination. Next. For that reason, the IPCC task force organized a meeting on this issue last year, where we gathered all the communities involved in this effort, the global carbon modeling community, the Earth observation and national inventory team. We closed them in a room trying to find an agreement. After 3 days. A full agreement was not found, but yet we started a path of a new dialogue, let's say, a path to dialogue and to mutually learn. Next. So essentially, we decided a path toward translating these two different units to different languages, knowing that the national inventory, which followed the IPCC definition, cannot really change the methodology, because well-established methodology which are based on statistics, on a collection of data, for example, national forest inventory, where you cannot separate exactly what is anthropogenic, what is natural, for example, due to the CO2 fertilization effect. Models, on the contrary, are more flexible and can disaggregate the result in a way that are more comparable to what the inventory is done. Next. So essentially, a translation can be done. You see in this graph, the blue upper line are the original estimates from global models from existing forests, excluding deforestation. So essentially, global model says that forests in terms of anthropogenic emission are on balance, close to zero, while the national inventory says that the managed forest, which by definition by the IPCC are considered, the flux and managed forests considered anthropogenic, are a huge source. We are speaking of 8 gigatons of CO2. And then the dashed line is what is our translation, the reconciliation, that works quite well at global level and at country level. Next. This translation, though, has a problem, which will be addressed in the next IPCC report. The problem, this translation will reduce the remaining carbon budget, which is the amount of carbon that we can emit until reaching net zero for a given temperature limit. And actually, net zero emission would not be enough to halve warming once we make this translation to the anthropogenic definition of LULUCF used by countries. Next. To conclude, essentially, we, as part of the TFI, we started this path of increasing a mutual dialogue between the national inventory team and the models that are behind the IPCC assessment report. Importantly, the IPCR7 outline of the working group 1, 2, and 3 decided that it will include estimates of land use consistent with national inventory definition. So the next working group 1 and 3 mainly will include estimates translated, also estimates translated to those of the national inventory. And this will have a huge challenge in terms of communication. The effort is to engage, to continue this dialogue. Next one is the last slide. And this dialogue is triggered also by platform for data comparison. For example, this LULUCF Data Hub that you can access on this QR code essentially compares by country. You can see country by country the latest data from national inventories compared to the latest data from the Global Carbon Budget, Global Forest Watch, and new estimates from the GRC Tier 1 from forest and deforestation. The idea is that once one expert sit together and national inventory team, Earth observation and global models see where the differences are in terms of specific land uses, then they can mutually learn each other or where the difference comes from and where each individual data set may have problems. The idea is to have a mutual learning exercise. I would ask Rosa online to have a last short set of slides still on land use to see how this problem that I just described impacts analysis, like, for example, the global stock take. Next presentation.
Thank you, Giacomo. Good evening, everyone.
The slide is arriving.
Here we go. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So basically, I'm going to pick up from where Giacomo left it, which was this discussion between the data, lack of comparability between the greenhouse gas inventories and the data collected from the ground, from countries, and the modeled estimates of land. And this does not only impact the historical period, but it also impacts the future projections of the land use sector under the NDCs. And an example of how this impacted the international community would be the global stock take, the first global stock take, and the analysis of the second NDC submission, which was the NDC 2020, which basically resulted in the full exclusion of land net emissions in the synthesis report, which was analyzing and tracking progress under the Paris Agreement. If you follow that little dinosaur on the square, you can access the paper that describes the next slides in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So let us follow a bit how the tracking of progress works under the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, which basically has two legs. One leg, which is understanding where are we standing, and the second leg, which is understanding where we should be. And the understanding of where are we standing relies on data that is provided by countries. And in the case of the land sector, this refers to data that it's collected on the ground and therefore incorporates both direct and indirect components of the sink. And here we are talking about data that is presented in the greenhouse gas inventories and then is projected in the NDCs for the 2030 and beyond net emission scenario. So where are we standing is based on data collected from the ground and then presented by countries, and where should we be, where the benchmark against where we are tracking our progress in the case of the Paris Agreement is relying on these modeled emission pathways that are aligned with temperature goals, which depend on the temperature target, goes from the SSP 126 to the SSP 119. And the problem is that these are using model estimates for land. Land has a big contribution in these models, but it is based on a different understanding of what anthropogenic versus natural sinks are. And this problem of connecting these two numbers basically was a big driver of the first global stocktake, excluding land sector from its analysis. The next slide. And this is presented quite clearly in the next figure. Which on the right panel, you can see figure 7 of the synthesis report, which is basically one of the major outcomes that closes the 5-year process that is the global stocktake. And this is a report that offers numerical information and graphical information of the tracking of progress. In this case, you can see this figure 7, which was a summary of the historical net emissions from 1990 to 2020 in this black line, and then the projections for the 2030 scenarios, both conditional and unconditional, in these blue polygons, which were relying on the NDC data sets. But as it's explained or presented on the y-axis, this graph excludes LULUCF, and so does the entire report. So basically, this first tracking of progress had land as a blind spot. And even if the modeled estimates had been incorporated in this analysis, the 2030 projections of the land net emissions based on the modeling community basically foresee land to be a net emission, a source of around 2.1 gigatons. Well, if we go to what countries are foreseeing the role of land to be in these projections of 2030, what we see is that both in the unconditional and the conditional scenario, the aggregated global value contribution for the land use sector is a net sink. And it's not only a net and large sink, but it has a big role in the economy-wide pledges of this 2030 and beyond scenario. So countries are really relying on the land sector for their targets. So next slide, please. What can we do about it? The problem of what we are seeing, as we can see, comes from the historical period. So the solutions that we are suggesting for the next global stocktake analysis, and particularly for the synthesis report, is a 3-leg portfolio. One, to offer a graph where, if we want, we can have like this no LULUCF scenario, as was presented in the first global stocktake in the synthesis report 2023. But then we add the information that is provided by countries on the LULUCF sector based on their projections from the greenhouse gas inventories and their activities for action on the 2030 scenario. And then we also visualize what the model community foresees would be the trends for the land sector also in these 2030 scenarios. As we have been seeing before, these two scenarios, the model one and the country provided one, are not comparable, but this graph would all give you a bit of an understanding for countries for where their collective efforts on land are represented in relationship to the previous analysis that had no LULUCF. So it would be a first graphical visualization. The second suggestion would be to translate, as we have done for the historical period, these global values from the model community into the greenhouse gas inventory framework. This is not an easy task, as the use of DGBMs for the future requires information about temperature and climatic conditions that projecting them in the future adds a lot of uncertainty. So there is not yet a very clear way of doing this translation at this point, particularly for individual countries. For the global average, for the global cumulative value, we can start, and we are already trying some future solutions. The third recommendation then is to inform policymakers and land managers of what this translation of data would mean then for global net zero by 2050, because we know it has an impact in the terms of time of implementation and in terms of the remaining carbon budget to reach net zero. And my last slide, please. I would like to finish with a positive note. So in Synthesis Report 2025, which has been presented and finalized in the previous month, which was taking into account the partial submission of NDCs 2025, we can see that some of these recommendations have already been taking place. So in this graphical representation of where we are standing now and the projections for 2035 include and exclude the LULUCF sector. So we are going into a right path for not having land as a blind spot in the next global stocktakes and synthesis report. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Rosa. I would then leave the last 10 minutes for questions, covering all the topics we have been addressed, from the methodological report on CDR, the scientific work on CDR, the land use gap between models and inventory, and the role of land use in the global stocktake assessment. The floor is yours. Okay.
So thank you for the comprehensive set of presentations. They were really quite useful. And as some here know, I follow the IPCC quite closely, and I've used all of the guidances for inventory preparation process. But I do have a question on the third set of presentations, which was about the G20 countries.
Yes.
So I find it quite strange that for the methodology report, we're benchmarking against a specific set of countries, or we're looking at only a specific set of countries. I don't see that would get a comprehensive outcome out of the methodology report. So it doesn't capture a global perspective of what is happening with regards to CDR, CCUS. So that to me is quite strange.
Okay, good. Just to clarify, so as maybe it was not clear enough in the sense that the methodological report will provide essentially methods to allow countries start reporting these activities from 2030 onward. The third set of presentation was an extract from a scientific work on CDR, which is called State of CDR. Where that will not directly inform the methodological report, actually would inform maybe the assessment of the chapter 15 of the working 3 of the 7th assessment report. So is still on CDR. We decided to present that because it's relevant. It's information that does not enter directly in the work of the authors of the methodological report, but still has to do with the assessment of the potential of CDR, where CDR are occurring, and is part of the scientific debate, but will not enter directly in the work of, there is no direct link with the work of the methodological report.
Thank you. Chris Sherwood from the Negative Emissions Platform. And just very quickly before I ask my question, there's a CDR-themed cocktail reception tomorrow in Belém in the city. If you want to know about it and you want to attend, please see me afterwards. My question relates to the NDCs. Can you comment on the importance of getting information on carbon removals in NDCs?
So I would forward this question to either Will or Rosa. So on the importance of getting information on CDR in NDC. Will, you want to start?
Yeah, I think it's very important. We know from the scenario modeling that reaching net zero is not an easy task, and what we do now matters for decisions later on carbon dioxide removal. So if we take clear policy action now to support these kinds of technologies, to put in place solid MRV monitoring, reporting, verification systems, to get the incentives and the policies and make sure that it's done in a sustainable way, then only then will we start to realize those removals down the line in 10 years, in 20 years time. So actually setting expectations, the NDCs are one way of doing that. This is a clear communication of how targets are supposed to be met. So I do believe that transparency is important. It's also important to understand whether or not the emission reductions are prioritized in the next couple of years as well. So I think it's good for understanding the broad sense of where countries plan to go with their mitigation plans.
Maybe I can follow quickly a bit on that. There are certain difficulties in understanding what countries are doing in their land commitments. So the first thing is that the report is frequently on net sinks, and then this has to be disaggregated between what part of that net sink comes from avoided emissions, what part comes from additional removals, which this is explained a bit in the paper that I was presenting. The second thing is that NDCs are frequently very uninformative. So the work that we did was combining information from NDCs with any other report that countries had presented under the UNFCCC, particularly long-term strategies, biannual updated reports. Now we have the BTRs, which are giving a bit of a tone of reality of how much of those commitments are really being implemented, which is what Will was presenting, and then categorizing those additional removal commitments into the reality mode of which ones of those are really being set into legislations where there is this evidence that they are really implementing them in their policy so that they can be trusted. So it's a question of trust, I guess. The other comment is that besides dividing the flags from the net sinks in the countries by understanding which ones goes into avoided emissions, which will not be related to CDRs, and which goes into additional removals, which will go into CDR after methodological treatment. Yeah, that was, I guess, my other point, that it is a process. From what data is presented from countries to the final CDRs, there is a few steps to consider. Relevant it is. NDCs only not. It is based on much comprehensive data sets that countries are provided. And the BTRs are very important for this process as a way to understand the reality check of what is committed to what is really happening.
Thank you. Any other question? So yes, please.
Thank you. Mélanie Juillard from CITEPA. I have a few questions. The first one on the CDR that were selected. I wasn't aware of these three principles. And is there also some principles that are linked to some assessment on the side impacts on biodiversity or other subjects? Because I know that this can be controversial for some of the mentioned CDRs. So is it something that is going to be tackled in this discussion, has already maybe been discussed, or is it not the work of IPCC because not related to carbon per se? And maybe if I can just go on the second one on the mismatch between the land use things. Do you think with the inventory improvement moving to higher tiers, is it going to narrow the gap? or is it like a remaining difference based on really perimeters, and it won't change the situation?
Thanks for the question. The first question is, and it has been a lot debated. So the CDR will be addressed both in the working group 3. There will be a chapter that will present analysis on the potential, the kind of analysis that we also seen in some of the presentation today, not related to method, but also will assess the scale, potential, and environmental impacts of CDR, including links with biodiversity. But we are speaking of working group 3. The methodology report itself will not assess the environmental impacts of the methods. Will just provide make an assessment if is a method already existing, should we provide additional information, is there is a method and data to assess, to allow country to report this method in their inventory. So from that point of view, is the methodology report will not assess the environmental impact of a given method. Having said that, this has been one of the most discussed topic during the IPCC plenary. And then feel free also to complement others if you want to comment on that. On the second question, if a country moving to tier 3 can reduce the gap with the global models, I would say no, because the difference is conceptual, in the sense that the models with a number of assumptions, which have their own uncertainties, separate what is called direct anthropogenic effects, which is due to direct human action, like deforestation is human action, afforestation is human action, and then direct harvest or forest regrowth. And separate that with the so-called human-induced environmental changes. So the fact that we emit CO2 in the atmosphere is create global warming, which has even negative impact on plants, but the CO2 fertilization, the buildup of CO2, plants stimulate growth on average with a number of, there are also limiting factors, but on average, the scientific community thinks that this CO2 fertilization effect is an important driver of the current sink. And these called indirect anthropogenic effects. And the models separate these two things. The inventory, which use direct observation means a national forest inventory. If you take a caliper and measure a tree that grows over time, you can assess the carbon that is stored, but you cannot assess the reason why the carbon has been stored. And direct measurement is also satellite. With the satellite, if you have satellite that measure biomass over time, again, if well done, it gives you an accurate assessment of the carbon, the buildup of carbon, but it doesn't distinguish the reason. The reason requires assumption and by models. And so these is a definitional issue. The fact that we are able to reconcile with a different allocation of disaggregation of the model result shows that most of this difference is definitional, as is not due to observational difference. So in that sense is a good news. So we don't disagree on what happens in the real world, but on how we call. Is it human-induced or is natural? Any other question? We have reached the end of our side event. If there are no other questions, I would thank you for your attention and thank the online speakers, Oliver Gedden, Will Lamb, and Rosa Roman. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, colleagues.